Today we're going to add SQLite to Austin Feeds Me. It's not absolutely necessary because we're using Firebase Firestore, and it's supposed to provide an offline facility. But by using SQLite, what we can do is we can enhance our search capabilities, specifically how we search text fields. We can utilize things like joins, and we can also save our data usage in Firebase so that perhaps we can lower our Firebase bill. And it will also make the app more performant. So instead of loading from Firebase every time or Firebase Firestore and checking to see if there are any changes, if it's within a certain time threshold, we'll just go to SQLite and we'll load it straight from disk, and it'll be incredibly fast instead of having to do any kind of network resolution. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to grab the SQLite dependency, and the library that we use is called SQLite, and so let's add that to our project. So we're going to do that in our pubspec.yaml. We're going to go over there. We're going to paste that in, and then we're going to need to do a packages.get. And so let's do that. And then the next step we're going to take is we're going to go over and we're going to create an events database. So we've got a repository, and right now our repository just queries Firestore for events. So we're going to add a database. So let's do that. Let's go new Dart file. We're in our data directory, and we're going to create a database file called event database. And then we'll do get dependencies again. I don't know how many times we have to do that, but okay. And then what we're going to do is this is going to use SQLite, so we're going to do our import, and let's do that. And let's create a class here called event database, and we're going to need this class to do a few things. And for some reason my dependencies don't want to sync today. What's going on here? What if we use the exact version? Let's try that. Maybe I need to save the file. Okay. Running Flutter packages get. So for some reason, it's not finding the dependency that we've added, which is kind of interesting. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let me check here and see. Let me upgrade. Make sure we don't have to upgrade Flutter here. I don't think there hasn't been any upgrades, but okay. So let's keep going, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a our database class basically needs to allow us to get access to a database, and then allow us to save our events in there, and then also retrieve the events. So let's go to the example, and let's see what kind of... Okay, so to get our database, what we're going to do is we're going to do var databases path equals await get databases path. And so let's do that. And it's upset because we need to basically do that within a method. And so let's make a method, something like initDB. And it's going to return a database. So it's going to be a future because it's an async task, and we're going to call it initDB. And because it's future, we need to put async here. And let's wrap this, and hopefully we can get our dependency working here. That's interesting. I haven't seen that before. Okay, we'll try that again. Still no love. Okay. Okay. So we're getting our database's path, and I think to get that we need to use one other dependency, and that's going to be our path dependency. So let's do import and package path.dart. And I think that'll allow us to get our database path. Let's see why it isn't happy there. And then also because we're doing async, let's add our async library. So let's do import dart async. And the thing's still upset. Sometimes it stays upset. And then our database is going to be called event. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a constant for our table name called event table name. And we're going to call that event. And then we're going to set up some basic kind of setup, because we only want one copy of our database in use at a time. So we're going to set a factory method here, and it's going to return a local variable called instance. And then our local instance of this class is going to be specified up here. And it's going to be event database instance equals events database. So it's event database dot internal. Now we don't have this internal method yet, so we need to make that as well. And we're going to make also a static variable for our database. So there'll only be one instance. So let's create our internal method here. Dot internal. So let's click in. Let's see. What is this upset? It isn't defined for the class? It looks like it is though. Undefined class database. All right. So what's going on here? We've got an undefined class for some reason. It can't find this method. It won't sync our dependencies. Things are not looking. And so it can't find the database class because the method internal isn't defined for this class. So why is that? What does that mean? Because we clearly have the method internal defined right there. If we click this, it should have gone up here. So we've got our internal method. Okay. So it's an internal method. Okay. Now, I did ask some questions on what this nomenclature means. I didn't actually find it. But I think it basically means we have this internal method on our event database class, and and we can call it to get an event database instance, and then that instance is what's returned if someone asks for an event database. So it's kind of a Dart Flutter way to do a singleton pattern. And something really is messed up here because we can't get our YAML file to sync, even though we just added SQLite. So what I'm going to do here, because this is going to hold us up from completing this, I'm going to restart I'm going to close Android Studio just real quickly. I'm going to open it up. Hopefully it'll work this time. I guess I can try to call it from the command line. The packages kit. Okay, so things are looking better. We've got our SQLite back. We've got a way to get access to our database. We're going to call it DemoDB. We're going to call it EventDB. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create. Let's go over to here. We're going to create basic. We're going to get access to our database and assign our local database variable. So I've got some notes over here on how to do it. So we're going to take the database path, which we got from our path. Or actually that's a method on SQLite, and then we're going to join that path with EventDB, and that's basically where we're going to store our SQLite database, and then we're going to create a variable for our database, and it's going to be await, and then we're going to do open database. And we're going to do database path and version 1. And then we're going to do onCreate. And our onCreate, and I should have put a comma there. Our onCreate is going to have we're going to call a local method called onCreate. Then it's going to get mad. And let's see if we can press Alt-Enter. And let's see if we can do create method onCreate. Okay. So we've got that. And then once we get our database, we're going to do return the database, because this is a future, and this method should be called initDB. The other thing I want to do is this path variable here should be what we use here. I made a mistake there. And so now we've got a method that's going to return our DB. We're going to do one other kind of setup thing. We're going to create a method to get the database that is also a singleton. So we're going to do an async method, future database. We're going to do get DB async. And so that's going to, if we click into here, doesn't work. And we're going to do if event, or if DB, our local variable does not equal null. What are we going to do? We're going to return DB. Else DB equals await, and what? initDB. Yep. And then we're going to return DB. So there's one thing I think we're missing here. Okay, no, we assign the local variable. Okay. Why? I feel like this should be that, but it's not. Okay. Regardless, let's work on our onCreate method. So we need to look at our Austin feeds me event. So we've got 6 fields. We've got a name field, a time field, a description, URL, photo URL, and a lat long field. That's a lat long type. and we need to figure out a way to store those in the database. So a few of them are quite straightforward. The name, description, the URL, and the photo URL are all strings. But lat long, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take the lat and longitude of it and save those in separate fields as doubles. And then when we get the value from the database, we're going to convert it back into lat long. So let's create our create method for our database. So we're going to do await db dot execute, and this is where we pass in our SQL string. So we're going to do create table. We're going to do a space, and we're going to do event table name, which is our constant that we set up there. And then we're going to do space open paren. We're going to go down here, and we're going to do ID. That was it. Extra one. We're going to do ID string primary key. So we're going to set a primary key variable, comma, space, and that's going to allow us to put a so now what we're doing is we're defining our column names in our create table statement. So I put a space after the comma. I'm not sure if you have to, but if we get debug output that this doesn't work, it's easier to read if you have spaces. So we're going to do name text, so we're going to save our name field as a text field. And then we've got a description field, we're going to save that as text. We're going to do comma again, and then we've got what? Time field. So time is going to be actually an integer. We're saving a Unix timestamp in that field. And then we're going to, we have a URL, which is the URL of the event. So that's going to be basically a meetup URL or an Eventbrite URL. And then we've got a photo URL, which I'm just going to call photo here in the database. And then we've got lat, which is a double, because we're going to have a decimal most likely in our lat reading. And then we're going to do long double. So that's going to be basically the definition. That'll be the definition, actually, not basically, but the definition of our database right here. And so what's going to happen, and because we're doing an await, because we need to modify this method as async, and I'm going to highlight everything and I'm going to reformat code so it'll get a little cleaner looking. So what have we done so far? We've created a static variable that defines the name of our table, which we're going to store events. We've set an instance variable for our class so that we can only internally instantiate this instance, and we've assigned a factory method for our event database class that basically returns that instance. And then we've set a method, an async method, to get our database. And what it does is it checks if our database is there. If it is, then we return it. If not, we generate our database, and then we return that. We assign that, and then we return that that variable once it's been assigned. And we've got a method to create our database, or to get the location of our database and to create the file and basically open it running the initial SQL. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a way to get our basically our events out of the database. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that actually in the repository, because we're going to have some logic. But I want to do one more thing, and that's I want to create a method to close the database. We're probably not going to use it in this video, but we are going to make a method that does that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do var db client equals await db, and that's going to basically call this getter method. And then once we get our db client, we're going to do .close, and that actually return db.close, because we're going to have a future, and that'll allow us to see when our database is closed. Okay. So now we've got that complete. We've got a way to create our database and close it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do quite a bit of work in our event repository. So we want to set up some logic in our event repository that basically says, like, if it hasn't been a certain threshold of time, then use the data in the database. If it's been over a certain threshold, then let's go to Firestore and let's get those events, and then let's store them in the database. And then let's update that timestamp of when we last grabbed data. So we need to add that logic to our event repository. So the first thing we're going to do is we're in our event repository. We're going to create some space here, and we're going to create some constants for variables that we need to use to implement the logic I just described. So we're going to create another variable for our event table name. And I know we could probably access it from the other class, but we're going to do it this way for now, just to keep everything in one spot. And then we're going to create a constant for the number of seconds that are, actually the number of milliseconds that are in a hour. So we're going to do milliseconds in an hour, and that's actually something like 360,000. Okay. And we're going to create one more variable, and that's going to be a key where we store our last fetch time. So we're going to do last fetch key. Actually, we're going to do key last fetch equals last fetch. So let me fix that. And let's keep in mind we need to give these some actual types. So we're going to do that. It's going to be, let's see, string 2. This is going to be an int. So let's not do that. Set constant int, and then we're going to do refresh threshold. Equals, we're going to do 3 hours. So if it's been over 3 hours, we're going to refresh our database if the user uses the app. Okay. And we've got our get events method here, which is an async method. It's a static method on our repository. And what we're going to do is we're going to break some of this stuff out. So right now we basically have all the logic to get the data from Firestore. So let's take this method right here and let's extract it. So let's do extract method, and we'll do something like get events from Firestore. And now we've got our get events from Firestore. So we're going to get our events from Firestore, and we're going to return those events. But what we're looking to do now is create a method that will allow us to get our events from the database. And also a method that will save the events we get from Firestore in our database. So let's create a method that's going to basically determine whether it'll determine when we get our whether we should do a refresh or not. So we're going to need to access shared preferences now. And shared preferences is a way for us to store small pieces of data on a device. Flutter, I don't know what the name of the library, so it's just called shared preferences. So we're going to grab shared preferences, we're going to grab this dependency. Let's go back over to Android Studio, which we're using to make a Flutter app. And let's add this dependency so we gain access to shared preferences. And then let's add our import statement. And then let's kind of look at how we use this. So this isn't, okay, so we kind of get a shared preference instance, and then we can get a counter variable what we're going to do is we're going to basically get our shared preferences, and we're going to check our last fetch time. And if our last fetch time, if our current time minus the last fetch time is greater than our threshold, we're going to do a refresh. So let's go back over here, and maybe we'll need to do a manual refresh again. So let's go back to our events repository, and let's create. Okay, nothing copied. So let's go back over here and get our import statement. Okay, and then let's create a method like the method that I just described. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a static method. Static bool should refresh events. And to do that, we're going to need to get access to shared preferences. So let's do, what did our shared preferences say? Oh, what did our shared preferences say? So here's how we get access to shared preferences. Let's go to Android Studio. And we've got an await here. It's upset, so we need to put in async. We need to make sure you see async. And then it's going to say, hey, this is async. This should be future. Okay. Can do. So once we get our preferences, we're going to check for, we're going to get an int, and it's going to be last fetch, key last fetch. Okay. We need to assign that int last fetch time. And then we're going to do if last fetch time equals null, return true. Basically, if we don't have a last fetch time, then we definitely need to refresh. And then we're going to do a check. So we're going to do if, let's figure out how to get our current time. So here's how we get our current time. We're going to do new date time now, milliseconds. So I said the basic logic is if the current time minus the last fetch time, is greater than our threshold, refresh threshold, then we'll return true. Else we'll return false. So we don't even need it. We just need a return statement. So we'll just return. So if it's greater than our refresh threshold, it'll return true, and we'll refresh. If not, we'll return false. Okay. So let's add that logic here. And everything should work right now. Hopefully. It's not going to grab any events from the database, but it should build. So I'm going to kick off a build here. Something's happening today with my syncs, with my package syncs. Oh well. So if should refresh events. We do that, else get events from database. So I don't know why we pass events in here. We don't need that. We don't need to pass in our events. We can just do return, and that should be good. And so this thing's angry, so let's create a method for get events from database. And that's where things are going to get a little bit we're going to get some little bit more into our database kung fu nonsense. Okay, so we've got that. The other thing we want to do is we want to create a method. So if we actually go to Firestore, we want to update our last fetch time. So we want to create a method that's set last fetch time to now. And this will basically update, like I said, our last fetch time. So let's do that. It's going to need to be async. It's a void method. I don't know if you need to do future void. That would actually, I think we just saw a method that allowed us to do that. So we're going to do shared preferences, shared preference equals await get. Okay. And we're going to do shared preferences dot set int last key last fetch. We're going to grab, where was our, it was like date dot now. What was the method for that? Date time dot now. So date time dot now. 12 seconds since epoch. So now we've got a method to set our last fetch time to now. And we need another method. I know we're making a lot here, but once we get our events from Firestore and we set our last fetch time to now, the next thing we need to do is we need to save our events that we got from Firestore in the database. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a method on our model object that'll turn our Austin feeds me event into something that we can basically insert into a row in the database. So let's do insert events in database. And that's going to take an events object. It's also upset, so we'll create a method for that. Okay, so let's go and do what I just referred to. Okay, so it's going to take a list of Austin feeds me events, and then what we need to do is we need to get access to our database. So we're going to do database db client equals event date. So we need to import our event database. Event database.dart. Don't forget your semicolons. Event database. I think we can just do await get. DB? That doesn't seem right. Maybe it's just DB. Okay. And then this thing is all upset because we need to add async. And then what does this say? Should this be a future? Oh no, it's because we don't have the database in our path. And then what we're going to do is for each event, we're going to do events for each event. And we're going to do an insert into database. But let's go back over to our model object. And let's add that method I was referring to. So we're going to add a method on our model object that allows us to very easily create a map that we'll then use to insert these records. So before we get started on that, we're going to, this is a lot of specifying the same thing, and there's not necessarily a really good library or anything like SQLite or anything or auto value. I don't think there's an auto value for Flutter yet or something like that. So we do a lot of things manually. So that's okay. So we're going to create basically an identifier for all the columns in our database. So we've got a column ID, and we're going to do _ID. And what do we have? We have a column for name. Name. URL equals URL. And we do need to make sure that these match the columns in our create statement. We'll get some exceptions if we don't. So that's helpful. So let me actually follow a pattern here. I just want to make sure that we're specific here. I mean, you could say, you could get away with not putting the word column here, but we're going to specify it. Static Okay, and then we're going to create a method called toMap, and it's going to return a map of string.dynamic. And the strings are going to be the column fields that we specified up here, and dynamic is basically going to be one of the values that one of the fields that we've got here. Okay? So let's get to it. So we're going to do column name. So we're specifying our map, column description. Why is this upset already? Only static, so maybe we need to make there we go. Now we're good. Column URL. What do we got next? Column photo. Oh, then we can't. We need to make these comments. Column lat, and we're actually going to do this. We're going to do lat long dot latitude, column long, lat long, longitude. And this is, I don't like the formatting we're getting here. Tried to reformat it earlier and it didn't do it. There we go, that's beautiful. So we've got a method here called toMap, and we specify the map here, and then we return it. I think we could do, no, I don't think we can. Let's do this. No. So in this method, we create a map variable. And then return that map variable. We might be able to do, I don't know if it would infer type, I don't know. I'm not a Dart expert, so I'm not even going to try. So now what we're going to do is we're going to insert these records in our database. And we're going to put some logging in here. So let's do that. Let's do events. For each event, we're going to do int event ID equals dbclient.insert. We're going to take our table name, and we're going to do event.toMap. So we're going to use that toMap variable we made, and then we're going to just print this will just give us while as we're making this some debug output. So why is this upset? Oh, because it's an async event. Okay. Something is not right here. I think it's with this for each. Okay. So because the method is async, we need to put so we don't need that arrow there. We basically throw a disclosure. We say it's async closure. We specify the param. It's there, and then we're going to do the event ID is toString. So let's run this thing. Let's fire it up, and let's see if we get any logs that say inserting event. Nope, nothing. Are we calling this method? Looks like we are. What if we just put true here? Okay, so now we've got our events being inserted in the database. Let's run this, let's switch tabs. We went and queried events, we got even more events. But what's happening is we're getting events added each time we hit the repository. So we need to basically delete all the old events here when we get the new events, before we insert the new events. So let's do delete event table name. And so now we're going to delete everything in our event table before we start inserting all the events. Okay, so here's our current logic. We check to see if we should refresh our events. And if we should, we go to Firestore, we get those events. We set our last refresh time, our last fetch time to now. And then we insert the events we got from Firestore into the database. If we shouldn't refresh events or we don't need to, then we should get our events from the database. And so we should do events equals get events from database. Okay, so now we need to figure out how to get our events from the database. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how to get events from the database. So it's going to be an async method, which means we need to make this a future. Was our Firestore was a future, so this is going to have to be a future too. And I don't know how to do it. There's a way to basically, when you do that, to not have it overwrite things. I need to remember how to do that. So we're going to get access to our database. And I guess we could just have one global variable for our database, but we don't right now. So that's okay. So let's get our database, and let's do dbclient dot. Is there a get? Is it query? So query event table name. And I don't think we need any qualifiers right now. But this is going to return something. So it's going to return a list of map string dynamics. So let's do list map string dynamic. Basically what we inserted into the database is going to return our, or do events from database. Okay. Then we're going to have to basically turn this into a list of, I have a spelling mistake here. For each, we're going to do another for each. We're going to do event from database. And then for each event in the database, okay, so we're going to do some shorthand here. So we need to, but before we get there, we need to go back to our model object, and we need to basically create the inverse of this to map. So instead of doing a to map, we're going to do a from map. So we're going to do a static variable that returns an Austin feeds me, or a static method that returns an Austin feeds me event called from map. And guess what? It's going to take a map. And then we're going to do return new Austin feeds me event. And we're just going to do map column name. Time is going to be map column time. And it just gave us the, whoa, we weren't inserting time. So we need to add something for time here. Did we get that in our event database? So we call it time. Okay, so that's good. Let's follow the same order. So let's do column time. I'm going to space this out a little bit. We're going to do comma, description, map, column description. So, and then we've got URL, map. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, and now we need to do lat long, right? And so here's where we need to take our values from two columns and do a new lat long. Map column lat. And then a map column long. And why is this upset? Undefined class Austin feeds me. Okay, so now we've got our from map variable, and we basically take a map, and then we return Austin feeds me event. So let's go back to our repo, and let's do return events from database dot map. So each event we're going to throw into our basically our map event we just created. I forgot the syntax. Okay. So here's the syntax. We chuck in a event. And then we do Austin feeds me dot from map, and that's going to be an event. And then we do at the very end of this toList. So here's what we're doing. We're doing events from database, and we call a map method, which I believe is going to be on list, or it's on iterable. And we say for each event, we're going to create an Austin feeds me event by calling the static from map method on that class, and that's going to return an Austin feeds me event. And it says once you've done all those events, create a list out of all the events that you've mapped, and then return that list. And then what we do is we assign that list of events to our events variable, and then we return it. So let's run this baby and see what it does. So we've got an error here. Okay, because we initially forgot to put in our time. Our time column, and we don't have any checks to see if time is null or use a default value. So let's delete our Austin feeds me app and let's redeploy. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. While that's building, we'll go through some of this stuff. So let's look into the map method that we just used. And let's see, returns a new lazy iterable with elements that are created by calling f being a function, on each element of this iterable in iteration order. So we basically take that iterable, and I bet iterable has a toList method on it. It might not. It does not seem to. It has a toSet variable. Yeah, it does have a toList variable. I guess it takes a optional boolean of growable. The list is fixed length if growable is set to false. So we can see our events are being inserted into the database. Let's hit map, and something went gnarly. We've got some exceptions here. I don't know what happened. But something happened. Let's go back to, and I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is like basically instantaneous load from the database. So when we switch from map back to list, because we're reading from the database, it's almost instant. I mean, you can't even see a loading. We're supposed to show a loading indicator, and we do show a loading indicator when we load events during our load sequence, and you can't even see it in the transition. And that's because we're now fetching from the database if the last refresh time is within the last 3 hours. Okay, so this is just a setup for some other things too that we can do with a little bit more freedom and without sending as much traffic over the wire to Firestore. Like, for instance, we can now put a search view up here, and we can allow people to search the description of the events or multiple fields and then return that result. There are some more complications that come into play, which is like, what if we need to change the schema of our database? We'll have to come up with a migration plan. Many times for data like this, the migration plan is to blow away the old database and create a new one. And then just looking at the app, we could, instead of basically putting the time up here, we should probably put it either above or below this, instead of kind of split this whole cell into 3 quadrants because there's such small width of the cells. But anyways, that's kind of a overview of how to add SQLite to your app. And our use case is to provide offline support and faster load times for cache by using cache data. And we've got an event database class, and then we updated our repository to leverage our local database. We didn't ever use ClosedDB. I wonder if it makes any difference. So maybe what we'll do is, let's see if we can do dbClient.close. So we can actually call close on the DB client. I don't know why we would need a method for that then. I guess we could just do, maybe, so if we didn't have access to the client, we could do that. Close DB. Okay. So we can add that to basically our methods. So if our database is closed, we don't keep our database. So after we're done using the database, we don't keep our database connections open. So let's go to the next spot. Get events from Firestore, get events from database. So once we get our events, I think we can close it right here. So we can close it because we've already got our list here. So let's do, yeah, that's a good time to close it. Let's make sure, let's run it one more time, make sure everything works. I've got a repo for this project. If you'd like to see the code, I think it's in the description, but it's on GitHub. It's called Austin Feeds Me Flutter. All these events that we're looking at are free food events in Austin that are either taken from Meetup or Eventbrite. And feel free to look at the repo. If you have any questions on anything, feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter is whereisdarren. If you have anything that you would like to talk about or see a presentation on, let me know that too, and I can get that into play as well. Alright guys, that's just a quick tutorial on how to get SQLite into Flutter app. Thank you.